Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims, and I feel like I'm really branded up today. I've got like a VUX World hoodie on, I've got a yellow t-shirt underneath, there's a VUX World neon sign, and there's a yellow kind of mic cover, so I feel as though I'm like overdoing the brand situation today. Which is intense. But there you go. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about a really interesting topic, which is very close to my heart. Being a creative at heart, but also having a lot of experience working with, development teams and technical teams. We're going to be discussing how to take a design-led approach and a design-first approach into a typically development and technical led organization. And I'm joined today by Collin Carnahan, who is the senior conversational designer at Workday. Collin, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you. I should have worn some yellow too to rep
Yeah,
the UX world.
to represent exactly. Yeah, a bit disappointed. I won't lie. I'm only joking.
I know. I didn't get the
uh,
memo.
I know. Sorry about that. That should be standard memo stuff before these podcasts.
Yeah.
I've got to wear yellow. But yeah, no. Thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it. Over from
Yeah.
Seattle.
Yep. I'm based out of Seattle. Loving it. It's raining right now. Typical Seattle weather. So
Yeah. I think it shares so much similarities with the UK. I think Seattle in general, from what I hear.
yeah.
Um, yeah, but yeah, no, nice one. Thank you. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to getting into this conversation.
Yeah.
We will do that in just 1 second. But first, I want to give you your final reminder because I think this is actually this may be the last podcast that we do before the Voice Summit in Arlington. I don't think we've got one next week. There's a few things going on next week, which I'll tell you about, but no podcast. And so this is the last opportunity I get to tell you about the VUX at Voice event in Arlington on the 11th of October. It is going to be all about contact center automation. We've brought a whole bunch of interesting case studies to the stage. It's an in-person event at the Voice Summit. We've got a whole track there. And you're going to hear from Landry's Restaurants and Hospitality. You're going to hear from... who else is there? We've got Florida Blue, massive health insurance company, talking about how they've implemented a visual IVR, omni-channel assistant. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. And if you want to be there and be a part of it, then you need to go to voicesummit.ai and you can use the promo code VUX20 to get 20% off. The second thing to tell you about is the webinar that I am doing with Vonage and OneReach next week on Thursday, and that is all about demystifying conversational AI. You may have seen the Bullshit Man newsletter that I sent out recently, which was essentially there's some stuff going on. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, Collin, as well. There's things going on in the kind of industry and landscape that I just feel are kind of adding too much fuel to a fire that's already being hyped up quite substantially. And it can be very difficult for people to understand what on earth we're talking about. What is conversational AI? What is it capable of? What's the best way to go about implementing it? What's the realistic results that you can kind of get from it? What's hype versus reality? And there's just a load of that stuff going on. And so in this webinar next week with Vonage and OneReach, we are demystifying conversational AI. We're going to cut to the truth of the matter and basically separate the wheat from the chaff to advise you properly on how you can effectively go about setting up your strategy and implementing conversational automation at your business without the hype and without all of the frills and bullshit that goes with it. So go to vux.world/Vonage if you want to find out more or register. That's vux.world/Vonage, VONAGE. And that's it. There you go. That's the promo stuff over with. What's your thoughts, Collin, generally about the kind of whole industry at the moment and how you see, what's hype versus reality?
Yeah. Hype versus reality. Wow. I see a lot of companies really doing a lot of like forward thinking, but their technology just hasn't been able to catch up to that like vision and forward thinking work. I think it's we're seeing a lot of like really cool stuff in the IVR world. We're seeing a lot of really fun stuff in the voice world. The chatbot world, as far as like the typing type of world, that's kind of still kind of floating around, kind of stagnant. A lot of people are playing around with like skills and microtransactions and like, upping the contextual awareness of those things. But I think the real kind of drive in the future is going to be more on pushing conversational design into like IVR and like automation of services, especially around industries that really heavily rely on phone calls currently.
Absolutely, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah, nice one. So, tell us about yourself then, Colin. Tell us a bit about you, about what you do at
Yeah.
Workday, and yeah, what got you involved in all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. My journey into UX started uh, early in like 2013. I kind of started as a general just UX person, working in a AI text capture feature actually, that would allow people to like take photos of their medication bottles, and then all of that information would get populated into their phone. Pretty cool stuff. So I worked on the customer communication side of that. So like if any time there was like an error or an issue with that, like I would write the content that would then get sent back over to the user, and to help them fix the problem. You know, turn some lights on, maybe rotate the bottle, things like that. But that was my kind of like my first real dive into, I wouldn't call it conversation design, but I would call it just general UX work. But then I was able to kind of leverage that work over time into doing a lot of different really fun UX roles, doing like web design, just general UX work for a little while. And then I ended up getting connected with a London-based startup called Highliner Technology. Kirsten Shannon is a good friend of mine, CEO. Needed some general UX work and some product design work. A lot of strategy too, because it was a very early stage startup. I think I was employee number like 3 or 4. And early on, I helped her out a lot with like just coming up with product strategy of like what she wanted to do with her ideas. And it got timed that they needed to have someone actually build the product for them and like launch it. And we were talking to development companies in like in Ukraine, who were quoting us like really high prices to like build this chatbot for her company. And it got to a point where I was like, I'll just figure out how to do it myself, and I'll just do it. So I ended up putting on my engineering cap and taught myself how to build chatbots. My first product was a Slack bot. The whole point of it was a C-suite executive coach automation, because professional coaching is expensive, and so the idea was to automate that and make it cheaper for startups essentially to coach their managers. And that was a really fun product. Launched and shipped it with a few different companies in London, notably iProve, which was a biometrics company that did biometric security, which was pretty cool. And then from there, I kind of just got into the conversation world. I became a conversation designer kind of from there. I ended up going over to the Expedia group, working on a whole sort of with a whole host of companies, mainly with Hotels.com, another UK-based company. So I didn't really like leave London.
Were you in London at the time? Were you based in London?
No, I was in Seattle. So I was doing a lot of
Really?
these like big 8-hour time difference calls.
Wow. Frighteningly early mornings.
Yeah, well, then funny enough, after Expedia Group, I ended up going to Rocket Mortgage, the parent company Rocket Central, which was an East Coast company, and I'm on the West Coast. So I was getting up at 6 o'clock every morning and sitting on meetings very early.
Sleeping on meetings, did you say that?
Trying not to, but I won't lie, if I like took a break, around like 9 or 10 to like go have a coffee and sit down and relax for a little bit. Yeah, and so then I went over to Rocket Mortgage, where I was a senior conversation designer there, building out their conversation design team. The nice thing about Rocket Mortgage and the Rocket Central company is they actually invested a lot early on into bots and into conversation design. And so I kind of entered Rocket Mortgage as like the number 2 or 3 conversation designer there. They already had a few there, and so they already had a whole practice of the UX field already up and running. And then I came in and I did a lot of like major improvements to the bot, did some supercharging of data, conversational data, and then I worked a lot with a really good friend of mine, Kevin Ramnath, who is a genius when it comes to conversational data, and he was able to like get us to like increase all of our KPIs across the board with just pulling utterances out of our data sets, and like we like got it really good.
Mm.
And then
Was Aisha Salim working with you there at Rocket Mortgage?
I did. I worked with Aisha for a little bit. We were on. So how we had it set up at Rocket is we had a few different areas of focus. We had our we had an IVR team that was focused on like incoming calls. That was led by a guy named Ian Dongla. Then Aisha Salim was one of the first conversation designers actually at Rocket. She did a lot of the early stage work of laying like the foundations for all of the different bots that we had. We had like an Apple Business chat bot. We had a few different bots, but towards the end of her time there, she was focused on a lot of like inbound text messaging type of SMS stuff. So that was kind of her area of focus. I was more on like the web front, maybe doing a lot of like authenticated user FAQ help. And that's where I was at.
Nice.
And then I think she's over at Instacart now.
Yeah.
Rock,
we had
rocking
her on
it.
a podcast the other week.
Yeah.
About I don't know how long ago, a couple of months back.
Wonderful. Yeah, she's great. She's really good. All the conversation designers at Rocket Mortgage are really, really good at what they do, and I can't stress that enough. And then at a certain point, a few months ago, I had Workday come to me and request that I come work for them. Essentially, the director of the Edge org, who's over like the emerging technologies, was like, we need to have conversation designers on at Workday. And so I joined Workday as a senior conversational designer. I was the very first one at Workday. Previous to me coming to Workday, this guy kind of gets into the kind of the meat of this podcast, but it was mainly an engineering-led group, mainly led by product managers, and there was just a general UX person and a content designer who were supporting. They were supporting like 5 or 6 product managers who were also then supporting like a team of like 40 or 50 engineers. And so a lot of the work that was happening was mainly being led by engineering and the product management team, who were kind of stepping in because they didn't have the UX support there. And so
Is that just in the conversational channels, or is this across the whole?
just conversation, just the bot.
Okay. So they were already, when you went there, they'd already been doing this for quite some time, seemingly.
Yeah, the bot when I joined was about 3 years old. What it originally started out as was a tool for engineering to be able to like leave comments and submit comments to each other on the work that they were doing. And they had the idea of taking this kind of tool that they had built because their teams were in different time zones, and so they were trying to basically get ahead of each other instead of having to like wait on the Ireland team the Dublin team to then like answer their questions and vice versa. And they had the idea to take that and spin that into an assistant that would then be applied to be a product that Workday would then sell to all of its Workday users or Workday clients. And so I kind of came into Workday with no groundwork, with very little groundwork laid for conversation design, let alone just bot design in general. So it was kind of a wild west, if you will.
So it's something that had basically been, obviously it started out seemingly from a good place, from the point of view of it was there to do a job that was aiming to save some people time, all that kind of stuff. And so what when it first began 3 years ago, before you started, it sounds as though it was doing some fairly rudimentary kind of things. When you began, what, like, maybe we should start with like what the kind of use cases are that it covers and the kind of current state that it was in, so to speak.
Yeah. So I guess you kind of have to understand like what Workday is. If any of the listeners aren't very familiar with what Workday is, they're a human capital management product. So they're basically HR, human resources. That's what the product is. It's a software as a service for HR needs. So that's pretty broad in what it can do. And so the product actually is Workday is used across many industries: healthcare, government, education, private sector. It it really is this like one thing, one product fits all these kinds of categories. The selling point to Workday is it's very customizable in that it can be tailored to your business's needs. And so with like the chatbot or the assistant, the engineers had built out this very robust bot that was able to do a lot of transactional things, a lot of pulling information and submitting information, a lot of like time off type of things. That's a lot of where a lot of the work in the assistant was is basically becoming a parody of what Workday was inside of a chat container. And then as Workday grew, they grew into the world of Slack and Microsoft Teams and this, and so they've developed their own apps where they then have also integrated assistant into the chatbot assistant into those products as well. So it's it's kind of one of those things of like it can do a lot of really technical things, but as far as like the conversation is concerned, there really is not a lot of back and forth in the content. It's mainly asking people what days do you want off, or telling them how much their paycheck is going to be, things like that.
Right. So it's essentially just looking for a very straightforward answer, basically slot filling by the sounds of things.
Kind of, yeah. It's using dictionary, what we call dictionary terms, in order to like pull up FAQ content. We have a few different kinds of initiatives that that go a little bit more into the business information. So like because Workday is trying to support the 5,000 or so tenant customers that we have, the bot is tailored to each one of those customers. So that kind of makes that's where the difficulty for conversation design arises, because you would have to if I wanted to really do it, I'd have to design a bot for every customer. But the technology team has made it so that we can pull knowledge bases from the tenant, from the business, and inject that content into the bot using the technology that we have, the tech stack that we have. And so you can be at, let's say Meta, because Meta uses Workday. You could be at Meta and you can ask the bot a question, and then you can be at like Rocket Mortgage. We used Workday there, and I can ask the bot a different question. I would get a different result because it would be pulling from that knowledge base from my company. So it's kind of what's really unique about Workday's bot is that it's hyper customizable.
Right. So it's not an assistant that is used internally by Workday. It's an assistant that is being built so that Workday customers can use that as part of their functioning of
Yeah.
Workday. So in that
Yeah.
case, it needs to then bend around the needs of that customer without them having to do any heavy lifting. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, that's kind of the basic understanding of it. It's we've built it in such a way that it feels like it is a Rocket Mortgage bot, or it's a Meta bot, or whatever the bot, wherever the bot is on the Workday, it's that kind of bot.
Wow, interesting. Okay, then that's interesting. I mean, I'd love to get into some of the complexities around doing that.
Yeah.
Definitely. But maybe we should go back to when you joined,
Mm.
and you mentioned that the whole thing had been built, very, very kind of like dev tech centric,
Mhm.
which again, there's no problem with necessarily because everyone's trying to do the best they can, and it sounds as though it's actually not doing too bad as it was. So, what were the kind of, I suppose, the more kind of strategic aims around bringing in a senior conversation designer like you?
Yeah.
What problems was your being there aiming to
Yeah.
solve?
It was because it was such a like a dev and product management led team. They really hadn't thought about the UX of everything and how UX would play into it. It was a dev first organization, and design was always last. We were always being brought on to fixed
Rewrite this
content
code
right,
copy.
like yeah, copy right before it gets launched, or we would like we would get asked to like prototype a design up that the PM thought of. They're like, hey, I want collapsible feature inside of the chatbot. Can you prototype that up for me? And it's like, yeah, we can do that for you. So it was a lot of feature factory kind of work. We were the PMs, the product managers would learn about a business need, usually from a customer. They'd be like, oh, this customer wants this particular feature in the bot. Maybe we can roll that out to many different customers, and because they might want it as well. And so they were already coming to the table with essentially the designs already in mind. And so a lot of the challenge, and I'm not saying that it's been solved yet, a lot of the challenge right now is to kind of flip that paradigm of a dev-led first organization to a design first organization. And so that's pretty challenging for an older company that is pretty well established in the ways of how they're working. But senior leadership recognizes this, that there needs to be this more of a UX centered work. And so they're putting a lot of energy and resources into flipping that way of working. And so they've brought on some people from ex-Amazon people who are from the Alexa world. They've brought on myself, and they're really now kind of now figuring out that this is UX is kind of the way to satisfy and delight our customers through a chatbot rather than just provide a bunch of features that only 20 people are going to use, but we're going to put in like 100 hours worth of like work. It's kind of those things. And so a lot of my work right now is around education, and just kind of helping people understand what conversation designers do, and how they can help their particular little business area that they're like focused on. It's when I talk to a lot of people here at Workday, they really don't understand. They don't even conversation design is they've heard it, but they don't really know what a conversation designer does in their day to day. And so I've been developing slide decks and presentations essentially that walk down like, hey, this is what a conversation designer does. Even getting into the very like rudimentary, like this is what a conversation is. Like this is like how basic I'm kind of having to go sometimes of like, conversations are back and forth, and there really is not a lot of difference between a human to human conversation versus a human to bot conversation, rather, other than like instead of humans labeling emotions, we have bots labeling intents. And so it's kind of like where I'm kind of focusing a lot of my work right now. Part of the problem is getting these app development teams and these developers to just know that I exist at the company and that conversation design is there and ready to help them. And that's kind of where I'm laying a lot of that groundwork as I continue to build out a conversation design organization here at Workday.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like I'm always a huge kind of fan of the. It's like I think it's in the Agile Manifesto. I can't remember which part, but it basically says that everybody does as best as they can at the time with the resources and knowledge that they have. And what's really interesting is that you can build quite an effective bot purely just having some technical chops. You can get something stood up. You can have it working pretty well, because I think what the technologists have is a really kind of, I suppose, logical, for want of a better phrase, brain, which is like they really understand how to thread stuff together. So get this input, do this, match it to here, get this, pull that API. They can really piece together that kind of stuff so they can get stuff working. But I think that, and this is the case for all elements of design, not just conversation design, but for those developers who are more technical in nature, you don't know what you don't know, do you? And so how can we expect them to know about conversation design, to your point, having to do that education and lay that groundwork, because not everybody does know about conversation design just yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's the engineers at Workday and actually at any company I've ever worked at that are producing the designs, the chatbot designs that I create, are all very smart people. They're very capable of, reproducing my designs in code. that's not really the issue. The issue is like what happens is you get these really smart people together, and they tend to focus on things that really are more technical in nature and not necessarily user centric, unless someone comes and tells them that they need to make a feature, and then they'll go in and make that feature. What I see happening not at just Workday, but every place that I've done chatbots is the question of scalability, and how do you take that kind of that basic core chatbot that you've built and that's probably technically sound, and how do you make that a better experience, and how do you scale that to more people and bring more people into the bot. And that's where a lot of these tech-led organizations kind of fall flat, is how do we have a bot now, what do we do with it? And that's kind of where I see this kind of reoccurring problem in the industry, especially with these tech-led organizations of like, I don't know what to do with this, and so as an engineer, I think that users want X, and so I'm going to develop X. In reality, that particular feature doesn't matter when users just really want the answers to their questions, basically. So coming into like a Workday, they have this vision and idea of where they kind of want to take the bot and go with it. And as a conversation designer coming in, I like see this direction that they're going, and I'm like, oh, maybe we should kind of rewrite the direction a little bit. And so that's another kind of challenge that I'm facing at Workday, is we have these roadmaps built out, focused on feature sets that are only going to serve a small amount of people. My question is, what I'm working through is how do I rewrite this large organization as a single IC to more of a user-focused design work? And that's why I'm at Workday, is to figure that question out. I think that's the kind of the $1 million problem is how do you scale bots? Because every bot is different and every company's needs are different. So it's like that's where the UX designer, conversational designer, really steps up and is like really important for companies to have.
Absolutely. I suppose the challenge is another challenge potentially that you may face is that it sounds very similar to how a lot of global brands are structured and set up, which is that, in this instance, Workday wants to bring a more kind of like customer-centric, presumably data-driven design approach into the development of its capabilities, which requires some degree of culture shift. The same is exactly true of the Vodafones and the Unilevers of the world, who have centralized, I suppose, enablement teams, for want of a better word, call it center of excellence or whatever you want to call it, but teams that are there to help those more localized teams adopt standards, get consistency between markets, maybe get consistency in terms of their approach to design, their approach to quality assurance, their approach to technology, and just to make sure that things are happening efficiently and effectively. It sounds as though, am I understanding right in terms of your kind of position there, is that your aim is to be the kind of, I suppose, the hub in the middle, the guiding star that sort of like helps and enables these other teams to adopt a more customer-centric culture. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit correct. I think I have to be the voice of the user within the company, and so that's where I kind of can push those teams to be more of a UX design centric focus. It really is like conversation design is a very like specific field within the UX world, and you can't forget that you're still within UX and you're very much in the user experience you're the user experience champion for whatever area you're in.
Absolutely. I suppose that what I was going to say before was that the challenge, or one of the challenges, is that you kind of come into an organization that's already been doing this for a long time, and it's like, this is like any other area where if you were to go into an organization and all of a sudden start kind of working with the people that develop the intranet or develop the website or the app or the contact center, for those that have had invested in this quite a lot, it almost becomes like their baby. Yeah. And there's quite clear ownership and attachment to it, which is really good because it means they care about it. But in order to scale, sometimes they need to relinquish a little bit of control.
Yeah.
Um, and so I suppose, yeah, I don't know whether you kind of concur with that challenge in terms of you're kind of trying to win the
Yeah.
hearts and minds a little bit, aren't you?
Yeah, there is a lot of like relationship building for sure. Um, One of the things that I also see at the companies that I've worked at, especially that are these engineering and dev led organizations, is that this is the very first time that they're ever working on a chatbot too. So these engineers and these developers and product managers don't have the external experience or bringing in that experience to know like what is right and what is wrong and how to use UX. They're kind of figuring it out on their own. And so they've gone for a few years just kind of figuring things out on their own, and they've developed this relationship with the product where you're right, it is their baby. It's something that they're like really attached to. Thankfully at Workday, our our research team is really great, and they've provided a lot of like really good insights for the development team and for the product managers to kind of understand where our pain points are. And so the nice thing at Workday is the people that are actually building the product is for the most part understand the problems with the product, and but they just don't know how to really fix those. And so that's kind of where they brought in conversation design, because conversation design can really fix those problems. Not to really say the Workday bots have a lot of problems, but they're they need alignment in their interactive styles. What Workday did is, because we're trying to develop bots for all these different companies, they've basically handed off the development to app development teams here. And so you have all these different app development teams building for the assistant, but no one there, the assistant team, the engineering team, is not being that guidepost for those app development teams. And so what you're getting 20, 30 different types of conversational or interactive experiences inside of the bot that don't really align with each other. And so coming in and explaining and showing these kinds of mental model mismatches and little issues to the development in a language or a way that they can understand the problem a little bit better lets them kind of realize that, oh, you're the professional in the bot world, and kind of hand off some of those responsibilities to the designer. And so again, a lot of that goes down to like building relationships with the team and being able to speak their language with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The it's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got a lot of considerations there, which is one, as you mentioned, getting some consistency on the front end, without a doubt. Especially if you've got this thing working in lots of different companies, you've got more eyeballs on it and stuff like that, lots of different users. And if different use cases have a different tone of voice, use different language, having consistent kind of conversational patterns and stuff like that, it kind of gets a bit confusing or harder to use. But also, there's efficiencies you can get from the kind of scalability of some of that kind of logic, and also some of the back end stuff. So
Mm.
there may be repeatable patterns that different app development teams have got in common, that, you know, centralizing that and making that available for others to consume when that need arises, all of a
Yeah.
sudden not just brings about consistency but expedites the time to market as well. So
Yeah.
there's a whole load of kind of benefits that come with this kind of stuff. Um, I suppose, yeah. So we mentioned one, which is consistency of customer experience. The other one is potential scalability of those kind of common turns, for want of a better phrase. What are
Mm.
some of the other kind of benefits that you've been kind of identifying through bringing in a more kind of conversation led approach?
I think really, at least for Workday, really it comes around experience alignment and consistency. Um, other benefits really are being able to shape the direction of the bot, and to be able to be that like that source of knowledge for the team to be able to like rely on as far as content or conversation design is concerned. Um, like I said earlier, this is the first time that a lot of these people are working on bots, and they're going to places like Medium. They're reading like Google documents, they're reading these types of things, just general knowledge. Where a lot of the information that's online around conversation design is pretty good for the most part. But what is kind of the problem is a lot of the content online around conversation design is focused on a certain business area and a certain mental model of a chatbot. And so being able to come into a place like Workday and kind of help guide these developers through these types of things that they're learning and self-educating is pretty important. And that's like one of the benefits of for Workday to bring on a conversation designer is to have that kind of like, I wouldn't say like a source of truth, but like having someone as like a guru or a guide along the way. That's one of the benefits for at least bringing conversation design into Workday.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. You also get a lot of experience when you have a conversation designer that comes into a certain domain. You're right. There's a lot of stuff that is very unique to the business, unique to the use case, and best practice in quotation marks is only really what really matters is getting stuff done for the user. And
Mm.
so there's unique nuances that you come into, and in every single thing I've worked on, there's been something nuanced that has taken conversation design expertise to figure out. And so it's not just reading books and doing it, it's also bringing that experience into new situations in order to get through that new situation with a degree of either efficiency or quality or whatever it might be.
Yeah, quality control is super important when it comes to chatbots. A lot of the research that I've read, has shown that after one or two negative or bad responses or interactions with the bot, people just abandon. They just leave. And so, for a product that we we're trying to sell to people, is like we can't have a product that is constantly turning people away or making people frustrated. And so, that's it's really where the focus has been, is like to create a more positive experience around the assistant on. And so the assistant is, the chatbot is fully functional and it has lots of features in it, but if the one or two customers have a bad experience and they stop using the product, like that's gonna be a problem if that just keeps going and it gets over time it'll get exponentially bigger and more of a problem.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the old churn rate ratio, isn't it?
Yeah.
What have been some of the, not necessarily what have been at Workday specifically, but what are in general some of the, I suppose, if we were to play devil's advocate and go to the other side of the story, what are some of the sort of pushbacks that could arise when trying to bring more of a customer-centric, conversation design-led approach? Have you experienced, again, not specifically at Workday, but in general, have you experienced any
Yeah.
kind of like pushbacks or challenges to bringing conversation design into the fold?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes a lot of the problem that I see around bringing conversation design into a heavily engineering-led group or into a bot that already exists or has has been around for a few years is the tech stack doesn't allow for certain features. What comes to mind is like bots that are contextually aware require a lot of information. They require a lot of data points in order to like know things like user type, role type, where they're accessing things from, where the bot is situated in the ecosystem of whatever product it's on. A lot of these, a lot of bots are built on sometimes legacy tech stacks, especially if you're building everything from the ground up. For example, Workday is one of the things that they really highly prize is their security. On the flip side of that, though, that security makes it super difficult for conversation design to even access utterances, to access conversational data. If I want to look at utterances or conversations, I have to go through like 5 different people, and the utterances that I get are all masked. A lot of it's masked, even because of the personally identifiable information. And so, like, it becomes a challenge to be able to even improve the bot because of the tech that is supporting the assistant in just even general like legal issues that we have around accessing customer data. That's probably one of the biggest challenges I see is just technology not being able to catch up with the demands of the designs.
Interesting. That's interesting. Um, you mentioned there that earlier on that the idea of the assistant is that it is kind of like the same assistant technically speaking, but it works with lots of different organizations, so that every
Mm-hmm.
company can almost like tweak it and make it kind of their
Mm-hmm.
own. That sounds like quite an interesting philosophy, that, because usually 9 times out of 10 people are building bots and building assistants and it's kind of got a single use purpose. They may
Mm-hmm.
refactor it and put it into a different channel or something like that, but broadly
Yep.
speaking it's got the same purpose, which is just to have conversations with customers. What are some of the things you've learned since you've been at Workday about the considerations or that you need to take on when trying to design and build something that has that kind of flexibility?
Yeah, it's they had to go big when they were initially coming up with this. How do we serve every one of our customers unique in a unique way? And so the engineering team came up with a really cool idea, what they call intelligent answers. It's it basically is a machine learning algorithm that you can feed your company's knowledge base to, and then it would essentially do a lot of like text matching and word matching and things like that in order to pull responses that are specific to your organization. And that's really cool. But what happens is if your algorithm, if your models are not tight, if there is a, any slip in there, you're going to respond with wrong answers. And so that's kind of the challenge that we're at working through like right now of like how do we basically provide the right answers to the employee, because we're having to basically have the bot skim all of these knowledge bases for each company and be able to like pull particular information in there. And sometimes if a company doesn't have their knowledge bases set up correctly, the content that the bot is going to respond with is not going to be correct too. So there's a lot of like small little pieces that you really have to account for when it comes to creating a universal design for a chatbot.
Mm.
It's a challenge that we're kind of still working through, and this particular feature is only available for like our early access people. So we're currently tightening those machine learning models up quite a bit. We've also done and Workday has also integrated their search feature into their assistant too. So we have a little bit of overlap when it comes to like search too. So like we are providing Workday HR specific information as well as like business, employee business specific information inside of the bot, which there's so many challenges with that you have to take into consideration. And what it really comes down to is like really, really, really documenting your flows and how things are supposed to like interact. And that's kind of the way to like make things better for that type of design work.
Interesting. Um, what the part of the challenge I found with, when you've got a chatbot that is there to serve knowledge-based articles, or in general just answer questions, that
Mm,
doesn't require anything kind of like transactional or nothing that requires verification, stuff like that,
mm,
um, is that it can be quite difficult to figure out whether it is doing its job. And part of what part of what you shared there is actually part of the challenge, is that the company that's using it, so the company that's using Workday, part of the
mm,
issue might actually be it's their knowledge base articles that are full of either inconsistencies or similarities between articles and stuff like that.
mm,
So you've got one part of the problem, which is the knowledge that's been fed into it. But then still the challenge is when you've got something that is kind of like as open-ended, for want of a better word, with no kind of defined end goal, like book holiday, book annual leave. you can tell when that's happened because you can look to see whether the annual leave has been deducted off the
Mm.
back of the bot conversation. I wonder whether you've kind of learnt anything that you might be able to share to help people figure out one of the best ways to try and monitor the effectiveness of something that is that kind of Q&A sort of style
Yeah.
assistant.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a challenge with that at Workday because getting access to the conversational data is fairly hard. But at other companies that I've worked at, such as Rocket Mortgage, I had pretty easy access to the conversational data, and a lot of my time at those companies was spent just analyzing conversations and like just reading just how things progressed. We had some wonderful data science people that would be able to build models for us that were able to tell us kind of where people would go in conversations depending on like what questions they asked or like what intents they hit. And so it's kind of a combination of a lot of things. It's basic research. It's basic going through conversations, just seeing how things progress, and you do have to do a lot of that. It's just part of the job. But then also it's like really working with your research and data teams to be able to, you can apply metrics to a lot of these things. You can also utilize your research team to then go out and talk to the end user if you absolutely need. It really it's different from company to company, honestly, and depending on like how easy it is to either connect with your end user or to even just peek into their world, kind of like pull the curtain back and like look at the conversations as they happen in real time.
Hmm. There's some real value in doing that, isn't there? Like just having eyeballs on the conversation and really empathizing with the customer's situation is just so vital.
Yeah, I really can't stress enough how important it is for a conversation designer to like look at the conversations that are happening with their bots. You can utilize things like feedback within the bot where you can get people to, type to really tell you what the problem was. But even then, that's still, as far as like the UX world is like things that the users say versus what they end up doing are often completely different things. And so things like feedback metrics and things like that are very beneficial, but they're only part of the story without having to actually dive in to see how people are actually using the product.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it definitely opens your eyes and it helps you just really hone in and identify where the issues are and all that kind of stuff, which is good. How do you approach? So we've spoke a lot about the role, your team's role within Workday. We spoke a lot about
mm,
you know techniques and things like that around kind of like changing the culture from development led towards more design led. We spoke a lot about the importance of design and the kind of techniques and insights into how to create something that's more user friendly and stuff like that.
mm.
Jumping up a level, you mentioned earlier on around kind of like shaping the roadmap of kind of where this is going. What are your thoughts in terms of how best to do that? Like, in your mind, how do you go about kind of putting together a kind of future roadmap for something that already exists?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you come into as a designer, you come into a company where they already have roadmaps for the next year, the next several months already kind of laid out, and you might recognize that that's probably not the best direction to go into. Kind of going back on what we said earlier is like you really have to build trust with the people that you're working with for sure. If they don't trust you or they don't think that you can help them out, they're not going to listen to you. It's kind of sad, but that's just kind of how things work. And so initially you have to build that trust. But part of that is you can't just come into a place and say, hey, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is bad, we should go in a different direction. You need to have solutions in mind, or at least a roadmap or a plan to bring to the table to be like, okay, there's some issues and here's some areas that we need to like work on. We call them, I guess I would call them opportunities, not like problems. And so you're like, here's a list of opportunities that there are. Here is my particular plan to tackle these opportunities. And that's how I frame a lot of this work that I'm doing now is trying to avoid the negative and put it on a more of a positive spin of like we have these opportunities. But really as a designer, you you should be leading a lot of this work and be thinking about these opportunities and presenting solutions to your stakeholders, not necessarily telling them that this is how it has to be, but this is how it could be better. I find that if when people come in and just start ragging on, knocking on the product, people kind of just instantly tune them out. Because you were saying earlier, it's their baby. They don't want to hear that their baby's being bad. They they really want that kind of feedback of like, oh, this is good, but there's opportunities here to make it even better. And so that's kind of how I spin a lot of it. But having something to present and options for them to look at and see is pretty beneficial.
It's all opportunities, I see. It's
Yeah.
like that's all it is, isn't it? Like everything can be improved.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good something is. There's always something that can be done to make it better, and it's
Mm.
not detrimental to the thing that already exists because it's already been doing its job. It's already been doing well. The question is,
Mhm.
how do you get more value from it? How do you scale it? How do you improve it? How do you
Yeah.
increase its usefulness? And so, yeah, totally agree. Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on where the future of both, I suppose, the usage of the technology? You mentioned at the beginning there that in your observations the kind of chat medium seems to be maybe stagnating, but the voice side of things is kind of picking up. And what's
Mhm.
your kind of thoughts on the future of this stuff in general over the next kind of couple of years? Like whether
Yeah.
that's conversation design, whether that's technology, whether it's use cases, just
Mhm.
general thoughts on where you think it's all headed.
Um, you can kind of see it right now in the market, in the tooling market for conversation design. You're seeing a lot of people talk about no code chatbots and no or low code chatbots. You're seeing design companies like VoiceFlow and previous to them with Botmock popping up and making design super accessible to non-designers and non-engineering people. And I think that's kind of where the world of type chatbots are kind of going is moving away from these super tech heavy bots to GUI style plug and play, drop pieces in, move pieces around, visual style bot building tools. And I think that is going to create a proliferation of more bots on sites and people, smaller companies being able to manage their own bots instead of having to have whole development teams build these things. I think you're going to see smaller companies start to utilize bots a little bit more. I think the world of voice is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger with the more the technology develops. The adoption of voice is still very kind of in its infancy stage, and people are still getting into it. Mainly, you're seeing voice being done with Siri and Alexa. Those are the big ones. You're really not seeing a lot of smaller people using voice, but as soon as Meta starts developing their Oculus a little bit better and the metaverse becomes bigger, you're gonna start seeing these more voice interactive styles coming into play. At least that's my assumption or my guess of what's gonna happen.
Nice, yeah. I definitely concur with the whole kind of low code thing, and it's already kind of happening, really. Most of the
Yeah.
platforms have got low code options. Amazon
Mm.
AWS released a low code a version of Lex the other week.
Yeah.
You got Google with Dialogflow CX, and it's kind of all getting that way. All the other
Yeah.
platforms, the third parties that are not the big cloud providers, all have low code drag and drop interfaces.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really where the scalability is,
Mm.
and same situation that applies to your situation at Workday, which you were saying that you've got lots of different teams working on it. But if all of those teams are technical teams,
Mm.
then it's limited in terms of the scale that you can achieve. Because if you need
Yeah.
to know how to code in order to develop a dialogue management system to apply to one
Mm.
specific use case, you're really limited. Whereas if you've got a no-code tool, You can train people in conversation design best practice. You can train them in how to use the tool in the same ways they could use WordPress or something else.
Yeah.
And you can unlock a lot more skill and a lot faster,
Yeah.
that way. Definitely.
Exactly.
Definitely concur. Nice one. Well, Colin, this has been absolutely fantastic. Absolutely, really thoroughly appreciate your time. It's been absolutely unbelievable. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I'm glad you invited me. I appreciate it. It was a great time. I love talking about chatbots. So, yeah,
Definitely. No, it's been wicked. Thank you very much. And for those of you still tuning in towards the end, voicesummit.ai, promo code VUX20. Get yourself to VUX at Voice22 because it is going to be, I'm not just saying this because I'm going to be there, but it is going to be the standout event of the year. It's our first in-person event ever, and hopefully there'll be many more to come, so hopefully you'll see you there. And next week, Thursday, the webinar with Vonage and OneReach, all about demystifying conversational AI. I don't want to undersell, but we've already covered quite a bit of important demystifying things in this conversation. But there'll be even more of that in the next conversation with Vonage in that webinar, vux.world/Vonage. And we'll see you again very soon. In fact, I'll see everybody after the US event, because this is the last one until after then. So I'll see you in October.